Autumn had draped the Rockies in golden fire. The leaves of aspen turned a hue that felt more cinematic than seasonal, the crisp Colorado air swirling through the pine-laced mountain passes. The year was 2025, and in the heart of this majestic American town, the Aspen Civic Auditorium prepared to host one of the most anticipated international gatherings of the decade, the Global Summit on Innovation and Justice. Hundreds of influential voices were in attendance: politicians, thought leaders, corporate titans, and rising academic stars. The stage had been meticulously crafted for dialogue and debate, but in reality, everyone knew what or who they were here for: Donald J. Trump. The former president was launching his return to the spotlight, this time not through rallies or cable news rants, but through what he deemed an intellectual revival. His new book, Reclaiming Greatness, topped bestseller lists, and his keynote was expected to stir the pot. Supporters flew in from across the country. Cable crews fought for coverage slots. A private security team swept the area with the efficiency of a presidential visit. Few attendees noticed the soft-footed man who stepped onto the carpeted lobby that Friday morning: Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Dressed modestly in a charcoal gray suit with no lapel pin, no entourage, and no security detail, carried a single leather briefcase. He had been invited at the suggestion of a group of graduate students from the University of Chicago who had been inspired by his radical governance reforms in Burkina Faso. Though unknown to most of the American audience, Traoré's policies had stirred a new conversation in global circles about dignity, equity, and sovereignty in the post-colonial world. Inside the registration booth, Rachel Monroe adjusted her press badge. A journalist for the New York Times in her early 30s, Rachel had covered revolutions in the Middle East and labor uprisings in Appalachia. With a journalist's radar for tension and power, she noticed Traoré almost immediately. There was something about the way he observed the room, not with suspicion, but with a curious, penetrating stillness. "Excuse me," she said, catching up to him. "Captain Traoré?" Rachel Monroe, New York Times. "May I ask what brings you to Aspen?" He gave her a smile that was more patient than warm. "Perhaps the same thing that brings you, the search for truth." It was the kind of answer that annoyed political reporters. Vague. Too poetic. But Rachel scribbled it down anyway. Meanwhile, Senator Clay Donovan, a Texas Republican and keynote panelist, stood backstage reviewing his talking points. His voice carried the assurance of someone born into oil and politics. A sharp defender of American exceptionalism, he had campaigned hard to re-elect Trump and viewed this conference as a staging ground for a new global conservatism. "We're not here to apologize for being powerful," he told an aide. "We're here to remind the world that power is what built civilization." As the afternoon sun dipped behind the ridge, the auditorium lights dimmed, and the summit officially began. Dr. Eli Jacobs, a calm, bearded philosophy professor from MIT and this year's moderator, walked to the center podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Aspen Summit," he said, his tone measured, soothing. "Tonight we explore the ethics of global leadership in a time of division. We welcome perspectives from all corners of the earth, and we begin with a man who needs no introduction." Cue thunderous applause. Donald Trump entered the stage like a heavyweight boxer returning to the ring. His red tie was just a shade brighter than usual, his hair combed with precision. The spotlight found him, and he bathed in it like a king returning from exile. Thank you," he began, lifting his hands in mock humility. "Great crowd. Amazing crowd. Aspen, you're beautiful. So many people told me not to come here. They said it was too academic, too elite. But I came anyway, because I believe in ideas." Laughter, applause, and then the shift. Now let me tell you something, folks. America used to lead because we knew how to win. We weren't afraid to drill, to build, to fight. We didn't take lectures from countries that couldn't keep the lights on. And now, we're supposed to apologize for being successful? For being American? The room split down the middle, half ecstatic, half uneasy. "That's why I wrote Reclaiming Greatness," he continued. "Because we forgot who we are. And let me be clear, we can either lead the world or we can be lectured by it. But we can't do both." Polite applause from the diplomatic section. Whistles from the back. Dr. Jacobs stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. Trump." And now we turn to a lesser-known voice, but one whose presence reminds us that leadership wears many forms. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. There was a hesitant shuffle in the audience. Some flipped through their pamphlets. A few whispered, "Where?" And others checked their phones. Rachel Monroe leaned forward. Traoré walked to the podium, calm as water. He paused a moment, then began. "I come from a land where children still dig cobalt with their bare hands, where the sun is generous but our tables are not always full. We know the weight of poverty, but we also know the price of silence." The room grew quieter, he continued. "I have listened tonight to a man of great power speak about greatness. But I ask, is greatness measured by what one possesses or by what one does with that possession?" Trump chuckled, folded his arms. "In my country," Traoré said, his voice rising a notch, "we do not fear America's wealth. We fear when that wealth becomes a justification for exploitation. We fear when companies, headquartered in the halls of your democracy, plunder the future of our children with your flag on their business cards." Gasps. Phones raised. Rachel dropped her pen. But Traoré was just beginning. For a moment, the auditorium froze. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Then a cough, a shuffle, a blinking light on a camera. Traoré let the silence expand like a rising tide. "In Burkina Faso," he continued, "we understand hardship, but we also understand resilience. We are not asking for pity. We are demanding respect. Because dignity is not given by the powerful. It is claimed by the oppressed." Rachel Monroe's pen danced furiously across her notepad now. This was not just rhetoric. It was a quiet revolution being spoken aloud, on a stage never meant to hold voices like his. Trump, still standing with arms crossed, leaned into his microphone. "Let me ask you something, Captain. If you don't like American companies, why let them operate in your country? Sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?" A few audience members laughed, others tensed. Traoré didn't blink. "Because for decades, we were told we had no choice. That poverty meant silence. That aid came with strings. That sovereignty was only for the strong. But today, I speak not for the comfortable. I speak for the child who walks 10 miles to school and the mother who walks 20 to fetch water. Their lives matter more than shareholder meetings." Applause. This time, stronger. Dr. Jacobs interjected gently, trying to balance the heat. "Captain Traoré, are you suggesting that economic partnership is impossible between the global North and South?" "Not impossible," Traoré said, "but not honest, not yet. True partnership requires transparency, fairness, and above all, a willingness to listen, not just to speak." From the audience, a young woman stood. She wore a University of Chicago pin. "Captain Traoré," she said, voice trembling, "do you think the youth of America can help make that change?" He smiled, genuinely this time. "Yes, but only if you refuse to inherit the silence of your parents." A ripple ran through the hall. Even the skeptics paused. Trump, sensing the shift, turned defensive. "This is why we can't lead anymore. We let guilt replace greatness. We let lectures from the third world shame us into weakness." Traoré looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of tired grace. "And perhaps," he said, "that is the most dangerous illusion of all, that acknowledging truth is weakness. It is not. It is the beginning of wisdom." This time, the applause came like a wave. Rachel looked around and saw it happen. People, standing. Not many, but enough. Not orchestrated, not coordinated, just moved. As the session closed, Dr. Jacobs tried to summarize. "Tonight, we have seen two visions of leadership. One built on power, one built on purpose. History perhaps will decide which endures." He turned to both men. "Thank you." The audience filed out in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because something inside them had begun to shift. Backstage, Rachel caught up with Traoré again. That last line, about wisdom. Was it rehearsed? He looked at her, briefcase still in hand. "No," he said, "but it has lived in me for a long time." Outside, the autumn air had turned brisk. Leaves scattered like startled birds, and somewhere, far beyond the Rockies, the world felt a little different than it had a few hours earlier. The morning after the Aspen summit, headlines were ablaze. Traoré shocks Trump at Global Forum. David and Goliath in Aspen. Who is Captain Ibrahim Traoré? Cable news couldn't decide whether it was a public humiliation or a moral reckoning. On Twitter, clips of Traoré's speech racked up millions of views overnight. One particular line, "Dignity is not given by the powerful. It is claimed by the oppressed," was now a hashtag, a mural, a t-shirt design, a college dorm poster. Meanwhile, Donald Trump appeared on morning talk shows doubling down. "We're not going to let some unknown guy from a country nobody can find on a map lecture us about dignity," he said on Fox. "We've done more for Africa than anyone. We give aid, we build roads. And what do we get in return? Speeches." But the internet wasn't buying it. Comment sections brimmed with something rare: curiosity, even humility. Young Americans, many of whom had never heard of Burkina Faso, were searching it up. Some donated to NGOs working there. Others wrote op-eds, podcasts, even songs inspired by Traoré's calm defiance. Rachel Monroe had barely slept. Her exclusive profile of Traoré was now the most read article on the New York Times website. Her editor called her from New York. "Follow him. Whatever he's doing next, be there." That next step, as it turned out, was quiet but seismic. Traoré didn't attend the follow-up panels or the black tie gala that capped the summit. Instead, he met with students from the University of Chicago, young academics who had first suggested his invitation. They gathered in a small borrowed room inside the Aspen Institute, seated around a simple wooden table. He thanked them not with fanfare, but with sincerity. "You opened this door. I only walked through." One of them, a Nigerian-American named Lami, asked what many had been wondering: "Do you think your speech made a difference?" Traoré paused, looking at the rough wood grain of the table. "No speech changes the world," he said, "but sometimes it opens a crack, and through that crack, light can enter." That afternoon, Rachel tracked Traoré down in a quiet cafe near the edge of town. He sat by the window, drinking black coffee, no security in sight. "Mind if I join you?" He gestured to the seat. "I should warn you," she said, pulling out her recorder. "I don't plan to go easy. I would be disappointed if you did." She leaned in. "Why now? Why here? You've avoided global media until this point. I came because I was invited, and because sometimes when the powerful grow comfortable, the truth must become inconvenient. Were you trying to embarrass Trump?" I was trying to remind him, and all of us, that leadership is not a mirror for ego, but a window for truth. Rachel blinked. It was a poetic answer again, but this time she didn't mind. Back in Washington, D.C., Traoré's name was suddenly on briefing memos. The State Department released a polite but pointed statement: "We welcome all voices committed justice, though we continue to stand firm in our belief that the United States remains a force for good in the world." Behind closed doors, however, it was a different tone. Corporate lobbyists called emergency meetings. Traoré had named companies tied to cobalt mining. Now shareholders were asking questions. Advocacy groups seized the moment to push legislation around ethical sourcing and foreign exploitation. For once, a speech wasn't just a speech. It had consequences. 3 days later, at a town hall at the University of Chicago, Rachel introduced Traoré before a packed hall. "He may have arrived at the Aspen Summit as a stranger," she said, "but he left as a voice that couldn't be ignored." Traoré spoke without notes. "We live in a world where silence is rewarded and truth is punished. But the price of comfort is complicity, and the time has come to choose." In the back row, Senator Clay Donovan watched in silence. He hadn't come to clap. He had come to assess. The wind, it seemed, was shifting. Outside, under the bare trees of Chicago's South Side, students gathered after the event, talking, questioning, dreaming. "Do you think this is just a moment?" one asked. "No," said another. "I think it's the beginning of something bigger." The morning after Aspen, Washington, D.C. woke up to an unfamiliar sensation: uncertainty. The Capitol buzzed not with its usual rehearsed agendas and scheduled talking points, but with a kind of nervous energy, the feeling that a conversation long avoided had suddenly been forced into the light. Senator Clay Donovan sat in his office staring at 3 different screens. One played last night's summit recording. Another showed a rapid-fire stream of Twitter threads dissecting Traoré's words. The third was an internal poll showing a spike in Gen Z disapproval of U.S. foreign policy. The numbers weren't damning yet, but they were climbing. His chief of staff entered. "Sir, there's a call from Heritage. They want to know if you'll distance yourself from the summit footage." Donovan rubbed his temples. What the hell am I distancing from? A man telling the truth? That silence stretched into the room like a slow leak of air. Down the hall, another conversation unfolded in private. A staffer from the Department of State quietly forwarded a link to a colleague. A YouTube montage titled "The Wisdom of Traoré." It had hit 1 million views in 12 hours. The comments weren't just from Africans or Europeans. They were from Americans, students, veterans, teachers, even disillusioned tech entrepreneurs. When did we stop listening to people like this? One comment read, "I want my country to stand for something real again." In the newsroom of the New York Times, Rachel Monroe was no longer just covering a profile. She was chasing a wave. Editors offered her a column slot to reflect on Aspen, but she declined. Instead, she booked a ticket to Ouagadougou. "What are you hoping to find there?" her editor asked. She thought for a moment. The rest of the story. Meanwhile, in corporate boardrooms, the tremors were harder to conceal. A leaked memo from a multinational mining conglomerate revealed urgent concerns: potential loss of access in West Africa, public perception shifting, need new PR strategy. Back in Aspen, Dr. Eli Jacobs reviewed the transcripts. He had moderated dozens of panels in his career. None had felt like this. None had left him replaying a single line over and over. Only if you refuse to inherit the silence of your parents. He opened his email and wrote one line to his class of students. "Class canceled tomorrow, required viewing attached." And on the other side of the world, in a small village outside Ouagadougou, a boy with no shoes but bright eyes watched a replay of the summit in a crowded community center. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the feeling. He turned to his father and whispered, "Papa, they clapped for us." His father, stunned, nodded slowly. "Yes, son. For once, they heard us." The fractures that followed weren't just political, they were spiritual. A shift not in who held power, but in how people understood it. And it had only just begun. Rachel Monroe had reported from war zones, presidential motorcades, and courtroom dramas. But this assignment felt different. It wasn't just a story. This was a reckoning. She packed light. One shoulder bag. Her camera gear. A small notebook with bent corners. She didn't bring body armor. She didn't expect gunfire. But she did expect truth. Raw, unscripted, inconvenient truth. Her flight took her through Paris, then Accra, then a final hop to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital. She barely spoke a word the entire journey. Her mind cycled through the summit. Traoré's steady voice, Trump's silence, the stunned silence of the crowd. As the plane descended, the dry heat wrapped around the windows like a whisper. A sea of brown rooftops, green patches of farmland, and slow-moving motorbikes welcomed her. This wasn't just a country. It was a heartbeat she had never really heard before. At the arrivals gate, a young woman in a cotton-wrapped dress held a sign. Rachel M. Blank. "Bienvenue, Ouagadougou," she said with a wide smile. "I'm Asata. I'll be your translator and fixer. Traor's office said we'd be expecting you." Rachel blinked. "You mean I have clearance already?" Asata chuckled. "Not exactly. But let's just say, if you're here to listen, people will talk." They drove through the city in an aging but well-kept Toyota. Children played soccer with deflated balls beside walls painted with murals of Pan-African leaders. On street corners, young vendors sold phone credit, roasted corn, and handmade shea butter. "This isn't the place most Americans picture when they hear Burkina Faso," Rachel said, more to herself than anyone else. Asata replied calmly, "That's because most Americans don't picture us at all." The next few days unfolded like a novel Rachel hadn't known she needed to read. She visited a school built without foreign aid, entirely funded by local farmers. She interviewed a 22-year-old woman who ran a solar panel co-op. She met former gold miners now running a community-owned cashew processing factory. Everywhere she went, she heard the same quiet conviction. We're not asking for charity. We're building something of our own. One afternoon, she was granted a short audience with Captain Traoré. It wasn't in a palace. It was in a modest, sunlit room with woven mats on the walls and a pot of strong green tea on the table. He wore the same brown jacket she had seen him wear in Aspen. No ceremony, no entourage. "You came all this way," he said, pouring her a cup. "Tell me, Rachel, what did you come to see?" She hesitated. "I think I came looking for the man who made the world go silent," he smiled faintly. "Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's the moment before people start listening." Rachel leaned in. "Do you think they're listening now?" "I think," he said, "they don't know how not to anymore." She paused. "Your words about truth, dignity, justice, people are calling them revolutionary." "I don't want to be a revolutionary," he replied softly. "I want to be a mirror. If the world sees something in me, it's only because they're starting to see it in themselves." She scribbled that down, then hesitated. "Do you think your words changed Trump?" "No," he said without judgment. "But maybe they changed the space around him, and that's enough." They sat for a moment in silence. Outside, children's laughter echoed in the courtyard. Before she left, he handed her a book frayed at the corners, French on one side, English on the other. "The Wretched of the Earth," by Frantz Fanon. "This shaped me," he said. "But now, it's shaping us." Rachel left that room, not with a quote, but with a seed. On her final night, she stood on the rooftop of her small guest house, overlooking Waga's glowing skyline. The air was thick with heat and memory. She opened her laptop. The story wrote itself. He did not come with soldiers, slogans, or sanctions. He came with a question, and somehow, the world didn't just hear it, they felt it. In the stillness of the Aspen Summit, a man from a country few could find on a map made us all remember what leadership sounds like. It doesn't shout, it listens, and it lives what it says. The article published 3 days later under the headline, "The Quiet Storm: How a Burkina Leader Redefined Power." It was translated into 19 languages within a week. Back in Washington, Senator Clay Donovan read it 3 times before setting it down. "This changes everything," he whispered. And in living rooms across America, college dorms in Europe, and villages in Africa, something wordless began to spread. It wasn't a revolution, it was recognition. And once that happens, the world can never go back to sleep. Senator Clay Donovan had survived 5 presidential administrations. A moderate. He was known on Capitol Hill as the man who could negotiate with anyone. A handshake here, a backroom deal there. Donovan knew the rhythm of American power. But something had changed. Rachel Monroe's article had shaken Washington like a silent earthquake. It wasn't loud. It didn't call anyone out by name. And yet, behind its calm tone was a mirror, and the reflection wasn't flattering. Donovan had read it at 3 a.m., sitting alone in his Georgetown study. Outside, the city was still asleep. But inside, his mind wasn't. Her words kept echoing. He did not speak to nations. He spoke to the part of us that remembers we are human. Donovan remembered Traoré's eyes at the Aspen Summit. Calm, clear, not angry, but unafraid. That was what haunted him. Not rage, not politics, conviction. Donovan poured himself a glass of scotch, then stopped. He put the glass back down. Something inside him, some old muscle of conscience, was waking up. He clicked a button on his encrypted tablet. "Schedule private meeting," he typed. "Tomorrow. No press, no staffers. With one name, Rachel Monroe." Rachel arrived at the Senate office building the next day in jeans and a linen shirt, not expecting much. But when she was escorted into Donovan's private meeting room, she knew this wasn't just a courtesy call. "Miss Monroe," Donovan said, standing to greet her. "You wrote something that's been passed around more than most intelligence reports." Rachel sat cautiously. "I wasn't trying to make waves." He nodded. "You didn't. You opened a door. Now we're all staring through it and wondering what the hell happens next." He poured 2 glasses of water. "No scotch this time. You've met him, Captain Traoré. What's your read?" Rachel studied Donovan. "You want the truth? Or the version that'll fit in your next policy memo?" "The truth." She leaned forward. "He's not what you think. He's not asking to join the table. He's building a new one." Donovan leaned back, digesting. "You realize," Rachel added, "this isn't about Burkina Faso anymore. People from Ghana to Detroit are quoting him. There's a mural of his face in South Central LA. They're calling him the Dignity President." Donovan sighed. That's what worries me. Rachel tilted her head. Worries you? He nodded. Because when people like that rise quiet, principled, unshakable, they either change the world or the world finds a way to crush them. Silence. Rachel knew the weight behind those words. I want to meet him, Donovan said quietly. Off the record. Unofficial. You set it up, I'll go. Rachel blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. A week later, they met in Dakar, Senegal neutral ground. No flags, no podiums. Just a sun-baked courtyard behind an old library. Traoré arrived with a single aide. Donovan came with none. There was no press, no speeches, just two men sitting under a fig tree. Rachel watched from a distance, notebook in hand, but not writing. She knew this wasn't a moment to document. It was a moment to let breathe. I want to understand you, Donovan began. Not because I agree with everything you said in Aspen, but because I can't stop thinking about it. Traoré smiled politely. Understanding is a good place to start. You called us liars, Donovan said bluntly. No, Traoré replied. I called the system a liar. You're a man inside it, like many others, trapped between what is and what should be. Donovan nodded slowly. What if I told you I want to help change that system? I'd ask how much truth you're willing to lose in the process. That stopped Donovan. He rubbed his forehead. I've spent my life compromising. Now, I'm not sure what I've left behind. Traoré leaned forward. Then maybe it's time to stop compromising and start remembering. Back in Washington, things began to shift. Quietly, subtly, but undeniably. Donovan convened a closed-door hearing titled Reevaluating Global Engagement in a Multipolar Age. It didn't mention Traoré by name, but everyone in the room knew why they were there. He pushed for the declassification of documents detailing U.S. involvement in post-colonial African politics. He called for a reevaluation of mining contracts, for transparency in aid programs, for an end to military-first foreign policy in the Sahel. Not everyone was happy. The hawks called him Nave. The corporate lobbies froze donations. But a strange thing happened. People listened. Students, activists, young staffers on Capitol Hill. They started quoting Rachel Monroe's article in Policy Memos. One morning, a note was slipped under Donovan's door, handwritten. Truth is a stubborn thing. Thank you for not running from it. Meanwhile, in Africa, something else was unfolding. Traoré's quiet dignity was sparking more than headlines, it was igniting movements. In Ghana, youth started the Clean Power Now campaign, inspired by Burkina Faso's energy reforms. In Nigeria, students held silence protests, where thousands gathered without chants, just presence, in honor of Traoré's style. And in the U.S., something unprecedented happened. CNN announced a global town hall, hosted by Rachel Monroe, with participation from Captain Traoré via livestream and Senator Clay Donovan live in New York. The event sold out in 3 hours. On the night of the town hall, the room was buzzing. Rachel stood center stage, her voice calm, confident. We are not here to debate, she began. We are here to listen. Traoré appeared on the screen dressed simply, seated outdoors, the sound of birds audible in the background. Donovan walked on stage. No tie, no notes, just a man ready to face his own shadow. The questions came from young people, immigrants, veterans, students. What does dignity look like in a world that doesn't reward it? How do we lead without ego? What does justice mean in a world built on someone else's pain? Donovan answered honestly. I don't have all the answers, but I know what they don't sound like anymore. They don't sound like silence, and they don't sound like excuses. Traoré followed. Leadership isn't the ability to control, he said. It's the courage to let go of control and still show up. The room was still. People cried, not out of sadness, but recognition. After the broadcast, social media exploded. New leadership, the Donovan pivot. We are listening. But the moment that defined it came the next morning. Donovan walked out of his brownstone and was stopped by a young boy, maybe 12, on a skateboard. You're the guy who used to just talk, the boy said. Now you're doing something. Donovan smiled. Trying to. The boy shrugged. That's more than most. He skated away. And Donovan, once the ultimate political pragmatist, felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. It began, as many revolutions do, Not with a shout, but with a whisper. In a quiet town in northern Uganda, a group of school children gathered after class. They sat under a baobab tree, watching a pixelated video on a single shared phone.